So this afternoon, we will be discussing two different issues. One is the transparency of airline ancillary fees, and the second issue is involuntary changes to passenger itineraries. To help us remember what transpired back in April when the ACPAC last met, I have asked Rob Gorman, who is a senior attorney at DOT, to present on and provide a recap of what all of the presenters provided to the ACPAC members in April. So Rob, can we hear your presentation? And also, Rob, I think you may be on mute.
Thanks, Blaine. Do we see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Blaine. So I'm Rob Gorman, staff attorney in the Department's Office of Aviation Consumer Protection, here to provide a quick recap of the April 19 plenary session on transparency of airline ancillary service fees. Okay, so earlier Judy Coletta had mentioned the joint statement. In March 2018, a joint explanatory statement to an Appropriations Act was the vehicle by which Congress directed DOT to work in collaboration with stakeholders to establish guidelines with respect to transparency of ancillary fees. I won't read this entire quote because I will break it down later, but it in general asks the DOT to work with stakeholders to establish guidelines that should lead to airlines or any for-profit seller of commercial air transportation displaying on an airline's website or any travel meta search website with which it is partnered full ticketing charges, which includes any number of fees that are listed in the statement. Congress did ask for transparency on specifically airline websites and partnered meta search sites, but Congress also noted that consumers should have clear and accurate pricing information whether consumers are purchasing directly from the airlines or through ticket agents. So the scope seems to include both airline sites, ticket agents, and partnered meta search sites. So to break down the request, they are asking for guidelines with DOT in collaboration with stakeholders so that airlines or any for-profit seller of commercial air transportation would display full ticketing charges, which includes, but is not limited to, the seat price, bag fees, upgrade fees. They also specifically mentioned flight insurance, but the goal was that total charges would be fully disclosed. And this is another key, is that the guidelines should lead to a display of this material, quote, at the time of initial search. So in the April 2019 session, the DOT gave a presentation to set the table and introduce terms. And at the time, we talked about what is an ancillary service fee. There is no definition of this term in statutes or regulations, but in general, it's understood to be a fee that is charged by an airline for a service that's separate from the fare for air transportation. And that has been an evolving concept because traditionally the fare already included a seat and 2 checked bags and even a carry-on bag. But with the advent of unbundling, these, as particularly checked bags and carry-on bags, became ancillary services for which airlines charge separate fees. And now these services can be bundled, unbundled, and packaged in various ways, and the services include, but again are not limited to, baggage, seat selection, upgrades, Wi-Fi, entertainment options, and other innovative services. What is transparency? Again, that term is not defined in statute or regulation, but in general means displaying fees that are in a way that is clear to consumers. And it generally seems to involve a few metrics. Of course, the base metric is the fee information even available to consumers? Is the display easy to understand? Are the fees specific and not in a range? How many fees are there? Are they all transparent? When are they displayed? Those are some of the parameters of transparency. We also talked about the fact that other advisory committees before this one has addressed the topic of transparency. Back in 2010, the Future of Aviation Advisory Committee recommended that the Secretary, very broadly, recommended that the Secretary should ensure transparency in air carrier pricing, including ancillary fees. And in 2012, the ACACP, a predecessor to this ACPAC, again reiterated in general the findings of the 2010 Future of Aviation Advisory Committee and expanded to say that participants in the system should be guided by principles of transparency, providing choices and offers that meet consumer needs, and knowing the full price before purchase. Those have been the recommendations so far. DOT already has some rules on this topic. In 2011, the DOT passed what we colloquially called Consumer Rule 2, which directs U.S. and foreign carriers to disclose on their homepage any recent increases to their baggage fees, and then to list on their website all ancillary service fees on one page that's linked to the homepage. So you should be able to find all service fees on a single page of an airline's website. Also, airlines must disclose upon a search display, disclose upon the results of a search display the fact that baggage fees may apply and where the consumer can find those fees, and we indicate where that disclosure should take place. There is also the full fare rule that was issued in 2012. Now, it indicates that it's an unfair or deceptive practice to advertise a price for air transportation unless the price stated is the entire price to be paid by the customer to the carrier or agent for such air transportation. And the reason those last four words are underlined is because the full fare rule does not apply to ancillary service fees. Almost by definition, or the understanding is that those are ancillary to the air transportation itself. But if an airline does display the components of a fare, which includes ancillary service fees, then if the airline makes that choice to display the breakdown of the service fees, then that display of components must be accurate. In 2014, the DOT did enter into a rulemaking activity related to ancillary fees. We issued a notice of proposed rulemaking, which was called Transparency of Ancillary Fees and Other Consumer Protection Issues, then issued a specific supplemental proposed rule on transparency in 2017 in January. That supplemental proposed rulemaking was withdrawn in December of 2017. Also, the DOT has approved what is called NDC, New Distribution Capability, which was developed by the International Air Transport Association. What is NDC? It is a standard, a data transmission standard with respect to airline products and services that would go to all players in the distribution system. The idea being to present a uniform standard for transmitting data to all the players in the system. So with that general background in mind, we solicited and received the views of consumer advocates and many other players in the system airlines, online travel agents to get their views on transparency, as well as any recommendations that they may have. We started with the consumer advocates view. Travelers United was up first. And what I'm going to do here is broadly summarize each of the presentations that were made. So the big picture message from Travelers United was that with the advent of unbundling, comparison shopping has been made virtually impossible. The DOT certainly does allow unbundling, but in Travelers United's view, corporate powers, which includes airlines and GDSs, don't want consumers to be able to conduct true comparison shopping. They mentioned that ancillary fees are not standardized, and the recommendation was mandated full price transparency, with the argument that everyone in the system would benefit. Airlines could sell those fees, software developers create new systems, and security will be improved as well. But that was the general recommendation of Travelers United. Turning to the National Consumers League, another consumer advocate, they indicated that in recent years, the average fare has dropped, but that ancillary fee revenue has jumped significantly for airlines. They then extended an example about an individual who wanted to fly from point A to point B with a surfboard, and that the issue was this person just wanted to travel, wanted to choose between American or Southwest traveling with a surfboard. And they explained that even if you have two airlines that you're comparison shopping with, it's still extremely difficult to figure out the overall net price for that flight, in part because the transportation of this surfboard it's hard to determine what it's considered. Is it considered sporting equipment? Is it considered baggage? And how do I even go about finding those fees and so forth? And the overall illustration was that it's hard to comparison shop even between two airlines because those terms, in part because the terms are not standardized. National Consumers League pointed out that in 2017, the GAO found that a variety of new optional services has made it difficult for consumers to compare prices, and that back in 2010, the GAO recommended the DOT should require airlines to disclose baggage fees and policies along with fare information across all sales channels, and also to separately report to the DOT the revenues from all optional service fees paid by passengers. The recommendation at the end of the day from NCL was that the DOT should consider ways to reduce friction so consumers can more accurately and easily compare the true cost to fly between carriers. That ancillary fee disclosure terminology should be standardized across carriers, and to study how segmentation is affecting the ability of consumers to accurately comparison shop with the true cost of flying. A segmentation there is the concept that if an individual has, for example, a preferred frequent flyer status with one airline but not another, and maybe has military service or other ways of getting some preferred status with a certain airline versus another, that you should be able to enter that type of information into a system and be able to, at the end of the day, get a comparison that takes into account those preferred statuses of the consumer. Turning now to the Global Business Travel Association. They presented the consumer or business travel view. They indicated this is for corporate travel buyers, and they indicated that ancillary fees are one of the top 3 issues that face corporate travel buyers, and that today only the large companies with purchasing power can negotiate away the ancillary fees. The business travel recommendation was to follow the rules of the road that are set up by GBTA, which include fee clarity, saying that rates and additional costs, including ancillary fees, should be stated upfront, and that all rates should be available for purchase on all distribution systems wherever inventory is sold. Turning to NDC, we got a presentation from IATA about what NDC is and how it works. And IATA's position was that there was, and to some extent still is, a market problem, which is that, well, airlines can personalize their own websites, but that the third-party sites that are provisioned by GDSs, or global distribution systems, don't provide a rich and easy comparison shopping experience. In IATA's view, the solution to that is NDC, which modernizes a pre-internet standard and allows airlines to display different, personalized, and dynamic offers throughout the system. It indicated that this technology is increasingly adopted by users throughout the system, and as of the time of the presentation, 66 airlines and 61 IT providers are NDC certified, but noted that only a small percentage of tickets are sold today via NDC. The goal, according to IATA, would be that in an industry that is enabled with NDC, airlines could communicate more directly with consumers. Airlines could develop offers to meet individual needs. Third parties could enter the market then to help consumers compare and contrast complete offers, because again, the data system will be standardized. IATA took the view that NDC is disrupting the old business model, which was dominated by GDSs, and the GDSs are resisting this by entering into agreements with airlines that restrict the ability to use alternate suppliers of ticket distribution services. IATA did not present any particular or specific recommendations, however, with respect to transparency. This was more focused on what NDC is and how it works. Turning then to what we broadly called the travel technology view. This was, appropriately enough, from Travel Tech, which is an umbrella organization representing global distribution services, IT providers, online travel agencies, meta search platforms, which we'll also talk about, and travel management companies. Travel Tech said that NDC is one way to display and sell ancillary fees, but there are different other methods out there, and members are working with carriers on different methods. The market trends are now allowing for greater transactability of these ancillary fees on the online travel agency sites, but according to Travel Tech, airlines are not fully providing all the available data through all channels. Travel Tech does favor transparency, but does not support regulations here in terms of any type of mandatory participation rule, and indicated that the marketplace is evolving. Travel Tech then issued, and this was not part of the plenary session, but rather a submission to the docket after the presentation was complete, or after the plenary was complete. And Travel Tech's submission to the docket indicated that online travel agencies can often offer ancillary services, but that this is not universal and it's still dependent on airlines providing the data. That the NDC story is unfolding. No guarantee, however, that it will be the standard of the future. It's one of a number of possible paths. And that, broadly speaking, online travel agencies are limited by the data that airlines are willing to provide, and that there's no guarantee that any progress with respect to transparency of ancillary fees will continue. And in general, the recommendation was that the DOT should remain vigilant in this area to ensure that the system doesn't essentially collapse into a problem where we have ultimately unfair and deceptive practices in the system, but no specific recommendations other than maintaining vigilance. Turning to the online travel agencies, this was a presentation by the Expedia Group. And they looked at issues both from their own perspective, but also from the consumer's perspective, which was also very interesting. They said that the online shopping experience has actually become harder because there is so much more information to review. And that it's also hard to display when we're talking about the recommendation that guidelines provide transparency for ancillary fees upfront or at the time of initial search. The Expedia indicated how difficult that is, in part because ancillary services are bundled, and those bundles of services are tied to fare tiers. So if you go to a certain airline, you could buy essentially the economy version or the economy plus or some sort of first class tier fare, and they all may include different types of ancillary services within them. And the tier types vary, right? There's no uniformity there. And unfortunately, airlines don't always train the OTAs about what's in these tiers and when they change. And they also indicated that the consumer sometimes, well, often doesn't know what they want until they explore options. So it is hard to tell what to display if the consumer doesn't even necessarily know immediately what they want. Expedia described the market as challenged and recommended that consistency of data is required. Now, we put an asterisk on required because it was not clear from Expedia's presentation whether required means required by the DOT, required by regulation. Just generally speaking, that it's extremely important to have consistent data, and that is not present in the marketplace today. Skyscanner is a meta search entity, and they don't necessarily transact the ticket purchase on the site, and they don't charge a fee to their users, but they do try to standardize information for consumers to shop among different airline offers. But again, much like Expedia, indicated that this is very difficult because of lack of standardized information, particularly in baggage and seat selection. They indicated that the market is barely working, and again, like Expedia, recommended that more consistency of information from airlines, quote unquote, is required, but again, without a clear indication that that should be done in a regulatory fashion. Turning now to the global distribution system view, the GDS view was brought to us by Amadeus. They indicated that they operate the world's largest travel data processing center and provide diversified solutions for the travel industry as a whole, not just airlines. They talked about NDC as a pipeline for data, and that it's overall a good thing. It's more distribution centered and less airlines centered than before, and indicated again that the market is not working and does have inconsistencies, but a regulatory approach is not required. In a follow-up communication in the docket, Amadeus objected to some elements of IATA's presentation and indicated that GDSs are working hard to improve NDC's functionality so that it works. Airlines have pushed the market in the direction of a direct distribution model, which would be directly between consumers and airlines, and pushed back on the idea that GDSs have extraordinary market power, and indicated that certainly GDSs do want to transact ancillaries, but that there are obstacles in the way. Then we turn to airlines, a number of airlines, to present their views on transparency. Southwest was up first. They do have a direct distribution model in the sense that 96% of fares are booked directly on southwest.com. And they talked about the benefits of that system, both for Southwest and for consumers. They indicated that they have a more bundled fare than most, They keep this transparency campaign, which means that the single fare gives you a larger bundle of ancillaries than other airlines. And they indicated that regulation's not necessary here, and the market is self-correcting. Alaska presented a similar presentation in the sense that they said that the transparency of fees on their own site is very transparent, that the price is displayed on the search. You can select your seat. That's done during the purchasing process on an upgrade page. All the anticipated charges are displayed, and that in general, for visitors to Alaska's site, they get very few complaints about this issue. That again was focused on direct visiting of Alaska.com. Spirit Airlines similarly talked largely about, but not entirely, about their customers' experience through Spirit's own website. They indicated that they're the first carrier in the U.S. to offer ancillary options, and they're the fastest growing carrier in the United States. They talked about their consumers being highly price sensitive, and so they not only are very careful to shop for exactly what they want, but that Spirit actively educates their consumers on how to do that. They did also indicate that they do transact fees through, or transact purchases through online travel agents. But then even after that's done, Spirit will go back and send a separate email to the consumer to educate them about ancillaries with no recommendations there. Finally, there was just one last comment in the docket. We just wanted to be complete in terms of what was in the docket. This was a comment from Travel Fairness Now, which urged the committee to address not just specifically transparency of ancillary fees, but the growing practice of airlines to restrict third-party online access to and display of publicly available airline information. They argued that that was tied to the question of ancillary fees. And with that, I will close. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Rob. That was a lot of information. You can see how complicated this topic is, and it has a big impact on consumers, airlines, and ticket agents. So there have been a variety of suggestions made during this presentation, anything from mandating full transparency to DOT letting the markets work and just remaining vigilant in terms of its review to ensure the market is working. Different thoughts on whether there should be any regulations in this area. So I open it up to the committee members, maybe your initial reactions and some thoughts on this issue. Patricia, do you want to start us off? You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Sure. I mean, and thank you, Rob. That was a very detailed presentation, digesting everything that we heard in April of last year. And I think just so that it doesn't get lost, we probably should kind of take a step back in this and look at what it is that the joint statement required, or that Congress directed the department to work on. And I have to say, Blaine, I know this has been, and I've seen you in the former ACPAC type meetings. This is an issue now in terms of transparency that has been going on for over 10 years, pretty much. And it's already an area that's very heavily regulated. And to borrow some of Mario's comment, about incremental steps, right? I mean, what Congress directed the department to work on is to collaborate with the stakeholders, and it should lead to airlines or any for-profit seller of commercial air transportation displaying on an airline's website or any travel meta search website with which the airline is partnered. So this is limited to partnerships between the airline and these providers of airline tickets. Now, I think that this joint effort has worked tremendously, Blaine, and actually you should claim success for this at this point, because when you think about, we were just checking the data from Sabre and Amadeus, which are the two largest GDSs. There are already 155 agreements between Sabre and airlines and 157 agreements with Amadeus and airlines, setting terms for this sharing of information and disclosure of information. There are, a variety of regulatory, statutory requirements in terms of full fares, lowest fares, baggage fees, optional service fees that have to be disclosed. So I guess what I'm trying to get to here is trying to figure out where is the market failure. It seems to me as though the competitive nature of this industry continues to become more innovative and more creative to not have this one size fits all, as Fran had mentioned. It is providing a variety of options for customers to be able to shop and find the best options available for them. The market has created innovation again, such as NDC, to set standards to simplify that process. You have carriers that deal directly and not through third parties and selling tickets. But also, I think, now more than ever, airlines work really hard to build relationship with their customers. And their customers, in many cases, have very committed loyalty to those airlines. And there is a variety of benefits for having that loyalty with carriers that if you try to standardize this, you would be, I think, in my view, and looking at all the different suggestions that have been given by different groups, you would be stifling that competition, because I think that standardization does not allow for creativity on the part of the carriers to provide some of these programs that consumers get to enjoy today. So I guess my overall comment, or maybe question for the rest of my colleagues on the committee is, what's the market failure that we're trying to solve for?
Well, and from my point of view, I kind of align with what you're thinking. It appears like the airlines are completely transparent with all ancillary fees. If you go to their websites and you search enough, there's enough data there. The spirit of this was meant to have the airline be transparent with their customers. So if the customer does research, it wasn't meant to standardize data. And what everybody's trying to get to is basically a comparison in a standardization of data. I don't think this was meant to be that. I think it was meant to basically open up the transparency between the airline and the customer. And I think it's as transparent as you could get it with different airlines and competition. So it seems like the spirit is there.
So question for the members. I guess before the question, I do want to kind of emphasize one point that Patricia made, and then I want to ask a question. There have been, I think, the most recent recommendation that was placed in the docket, Travel Fairness Now, which Rob mentioned, did include a recommendation for I guess it's airline sharing ticket or fee data, and I think Patricia is right in terms of how Congress drafted the direction they want the DOT to move forward in that they did specifically say with which the airline is partnered. So I do want to emphasize that one point. The second really is a question more than a comment. The same guidelines talks about DOT ensuring not only airlines, but also ticket agents display on their website information, full ticketing information. And it specifies that when it's talking about full ticketing information, that it includes seat price, additional fees for baggage, upgrade, and insurance costs. So maybe first question, Patricia, for this is your view that, and I just want to make sure I'm capturing it correctly, that because this information is currently provided by the airlines through their websites and ranges, that is sufficient and that follows the guidelines, or are you or do you believe anything additional is needed?
I do not think anything additional is needed, and not just because the airlines are displaying, but because they're sharing that information with the GDSs under which they have contracts. If you look at the minutes from the meeting at page 20, in fact, I think it was one of the representatives, and I want to say it may have been either Expedia or I can't remember, sorry, who it was, but I think Mario had asked that question, you know, are you not receiving some of the information you need to receive? And they said, no, we're receiving everything. So I think the data is flowing, and it's, you know, the commercial agreements are in place and they're working properly. So I don't know that there is a need for really the US government to interfere with healthy commercial agreements. And that information is being shared and displayed today. So I think what you mentioned initially, Blaine, I think the wording you used was for DOT to continue to remain vigilant to make sure that the parties, the regulated parties, are complying with these requirements. It's the best role for DOT at this point. That's the view from the airline side.
Okay, thanks, Patricia. Fran, AG Carr, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes, I do, a few. At the meeting, I remember quite a few people commenting that the market is evolving. And when you look at the number of players, not just the airlines offering different types of, but the number of players, the DBS, IATA, the NBCs, the Amadeus, the Spectre, you're having things are moving. They're not always moving as quickly as we would like. They're not always moving in exactly the direction that we'd like. But it's a very dynamic market right now. And my recommendation would be, again, for DOT to have revisited this issue. The boundaries are changing on these issues. And I think setting in stone right now would be a disservice to consumers and a disservice to that competition that Patricia talked about. So I think we have to look at not a static situation, but a dynamic situation. And DOT should continue, I think, to carefully evaluate what's happening and to perhaps involve ACPAC and others in the future. But right now, I don't see the need, and I think it would be a disservice to consumers.
Okay. So Fran, so what I'm hearing from you and Patricia is that as of now, your recommendations would be that DOT remain vigilant in this area and potentially revisit this issue if needed, and if it is needed, that potentially consult with the ACPAC.
Yes, that's my view. I'm not sure that's Patricia's because she's coming from a somewhat different perspective. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, look, I mean, we obviously always want to improve upon and take, you know, the consumer concerns into account. I do think that at this point in time, just nothing further is needed. So revisiting issues, that's always an open door, I suppose, to revisit, obviously. But I just don't think at this point anything further needs to be done. So I think, Fran, we're phrasing it differently, but I think we're aligned in our thinking.
Okay.
Mario or AG Carr, any thoughts?
I'll weigh in. I'm with my colleagues 100%. I don't think anything further is needed. Taking bits and pieces of what my colleagues have said is what I had contemplated too. There are just the number of stakeholders show how many players there are in this market. We as AGs have seen something similar as it relates to hotels and the resort fees and other issues. And again, what it seems like is there is actually an opportunity in the market for somebody to be able to come in and say, hey, I can potentially do this better, but you don't want to stifle the innovation and the opportunities that the airlines have to better serve their customer. You don't want it to hinder the ability of the OTAs or others to come in and say, I've built a better widget, for lack of, or a better platform, or whatever that may be. So I'm on board. I don't think anything at this time further is needed based on, and I also would like to say, based on the law and the regs that you have laid forth, it doesn't appear that anyone's violating anything. It's just some folks have an opinion that there could be more that could be done, and I think the market can certainly fill that gap.
I agree.
Okay. One last question for the committee members before we move on to the next topic. And once we finish discussing both topics, we will open it up and see if we can take questions from the participants. The guidelines, the way it's phrased, talks about DOT, not the guidelines, the joint statement, and the way it's phrased talks about DOT establishing guidelines to lead to this transparency. So in terms of any guidelines that DOT may put forth in this area, well, let me backtrack. Is the suggestion from the ACPAC that DOT does not need to issue guidelines in this area? Or is the suggestion, let me just start, is the suggestion that DOT does not need guidelines in this area, or that the guidelines need to be focusing on remaining vigilant?
Maybe the guidelines are remaining vigilant, and the DOT does not need to issue any guidelines at present.
Okay. And Mario, at present means continuing to evaluate, and at some point DOT believes there is need.
Yeah. If you need to issue guidelines in the future, you will. That's from my perspective.
Okay. And are other ACPAC members in agreement?
I guess, my view on that, again, because guidelines may or may not be issued now, when there is no statutory requirement here to provide a report or any other really obligation on the part of DOT. I mean, I think it goes without saying that DOT remains vigilant on just about every area, and particularly Blaine, you and your group, do. So it kind of goes without saying. So I'm not sure why we would put an emphasis on this to say, well, it has to remain vigilant and no guidelines at this point. I think it goes without saying that it's, there's no action that's required at this point, and you will continue to be vigilant. I'm just not sure why it needs to be stated in a written document that way, but I could be wrong.
No, I can see that. I could see that. You always have the right to issue guidelines at any given time.
Yes, yes. So this is in terms of what the ACPAC's recommendations would be to the department. So the joint statement is not a requirement. It is part of an Appropriations Act. So it is kind of a strong request as opposed to a requirement that DOT issue the guidelines. But it is DOT working with the stakeholders, which we're doing as part of the ACPAC. And again, establishing guidelines, that is a request, is the way we look at appropriations language. Okay, if there are any other thoughts before we move on to the next issue, then as I have it in my notes, then the ACPAC's recommendation in this area is for DOT to remain vigilant to ensure transparency of airline ancillary fees, and revisit this issue if needed, and if so, consult with the ACPAC as appropriate. Does that accurately capture the intention of the members?
From my perspective, yes.
Okay.
I feel that the evolving market situation is a very important, I don't know how the other members feel, is a very important one that that DOT should watch how the market evolves with the complexity of players, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that's an important concept.
Okay. So is it better to state it, or is it more accurate from the ACPAC perspective to state that the vigilance that DOT is showing is in studying the market to ensure that it is enabling the transparency?
I think you're remaining vigilant as to the changes in the evolving of how the market is evolving in this area. I don't think it's on a specific thing because the transparency is already something that's heavily regulated. So I'm not sure. I mean, again, you're doing that as part of DOT's ongoing obligation to make sure that there is compliance with the regs. This is simply, and Fran, I'm sorry not to put words in your mouth. I think what you're saying is remain vigilant and see whether changes in the marketplace require any further, look at this. I mean, it's really about changes in the market, not about compliance with the rules.
Okay, so I'm going to ask just to make sure, because I think I may not fully understand the recommendation. And if it's going to come to DOT and we're going to be expected to implement it, I want to make sure I understand. So I understand the remaining vigilance. Where I'm not clear on is DOT remaining vigilant to ensure transparency continues, or is DOT remaining vigilant to ensure that there is increased transparency? And part of the way it does that is by looking at the market. So my question is, are we remaining vigilant to ensure there is increased transparency and making sure the market is working to enable increased transparency? Or are we remaining vigilant, which we would do now, because if it's a requirement, ensuring there is compliance? Because they're two different things.
From my perspective, it's compliance. It's increased compliance. And I'm just a dumb engineer. I'm not an attorney, but that's kind of a slippery slope, right? How do you define increased compliance?
Well, not increased transparency. That's why I'm separating this. So there's one is DOT remain vigilant to ensure there is compliance with existing requirements. As Rob mentioned in his presentation, there are already existing requirements that deal with transparency, including that airlines have to provide ancillary fee information on their website. So one is ensure compliance, which is our responsibility and we would do. A separate but related one that I'm not sure I'm hearing from the ACPAC is DOT remaining vigilant to study the market to see if there is even more increased transparency. I think great. I was afraid we lost you, Mario.
I think, again, I mean.
You actually did lose me. I was going to hit the mute and I hit the wrong part. That was my fault. There was a error.
Just the quickest way to get back online, though, Mario. That was good. I think, Blaine, I think, and again, I'm sorry to try to be so focused on this, but I guess I want to make sure that we're focusing on what the joint statement required, and we're not expanding that because you're creating more unnecessary work for you. Frankly, I think also, I think it says simply here that you have to make sure that there is transparency in the display on the airline's website or any travel meta search site with which the airline is partnered. So frankly, I still don't understand why a recommendation has to come out in writing about continue to do what you're doing. But if you do feel like you have to have something in writing as a recommendation, it seems to me that you continue to remain vigilant to ensure that airlines and I would repeat the language, that's all you really are, you really are vigilant about, is to make sure that you keep an eye on this because no action is needed at this moment.
Right. I agree with Patricia.
Okay.
I agree completely.
Okay, I am asking these questions and then we'll move on. I'm asking these questions because the language in the joint statement is general. So I wanted to see how the ACPAC was interpreting the language. The language in the joint statement says full ticketing charges, including but not limited to seat price, any additional fees that the consumers will pay per price of baggage or per seat upgrade, an optional flight insurance cost. And the reason I'm saying that the language in some ways is subjective is it could be interpreted in one of two ways. it could be interpreted to mean this is already something that DOT requires, because DOT does require, of airlines at least, that they display on their website information about all ancillary fees, but DOT allows that information to be in a range. If, on the other hand, if this is interpreted to mean specific information about the seat, or the baggage actually is available now, or the flight insurance at the time of initial search, that information is currently not required by the department, which is why I'm asking you specifically, because if a recommendation is going to come to the department, we want to make sure we understand it. But what I'm hearing from the group, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that you are interpreting the section to mean that it's essentially requirements the department already has in place, and your recommendation collectively is for DOT to remain vigilant in this area.
That's correct.
Okay.
I think if you take out the including but not limited to, you're back to ensuring that full ticketing charges are displayed either by the airline or by an entity that is under contract with the airline. That's what you're remaining vigilant to. I don't think it expands anything beyond that.
At the initial search.
At the initial.
At the time, that's if it can, because not at the end of a search. The guideline says at the time of the initial search.
Yes.
Last sentence.
Now yes.
Okay. Okay, so we will, AG Carr will be preparing the report. We will assist in terms of the minutes for this meeting as well. So I have it down in my notes as DOT remaining vigilant to ensure that the transparency requirements that currently exist continue to be fully complied with. Okay. Anything else from the members? Okay, we will move on to the next issue.
Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yes, we can see it now.
Great. So this is a review of the information that was presented to the committee at the last public meeting on the topic of involuntary changes to passenger itineraries. So an overview, the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2018 requires the department to review the rate at which air carriers, which means U.S. carriers, do not offer compensation or other suitable air transportation to passengers when there is a change to the passenger's itinerary more than 24 hours prior to departure, and where the new itineraries involve either an additional stop or depart 3 hours later or earlier than originally scheduled. The 2018 FAA Act specifies that the department should consult with air carriers and the ACPAC, the committee, to assist in conducting its review of this issue and to provide recommendations. The FAA Act requires the department to submit a report to Congress no later than 90 days after the review is complete. So at the meeting, the department reviewed the current relevant law on this topic. Generally, 49 U.S.C. Section 41712 is the department's statutory authority to prohibit unfair and deceptive trade practices and unfair methods of competition by U.S. carriers, foreign air carriers, and ticket agents. In conjunction with the rulemaking authority the department has under 40113, Section 41712 provides the department its rulemaking authority to promulgate rules for consumer protection related matters. The department has engaged in rulemaking under that authority in a couple different areas. First, 14 CFR 259.8, which is discussing notification of known delays, cancellations, and diversions. That rule states that airlines must promptly provide information about a change in the status of a flight, which is defined as a cancellation, a diversion, or a delay of 30 minutes or more when that change occurs more than 7 days from the scheduled flight date. They must provide that information within 30 minutes that the carrier becomes aware of this change. 14 CFR 259.5, which discusses the customer service plans. One section of that says the airlines must adhere to its customer service plan, which includes identifying the services a carrier provides to mitigate passenger inconveniences resulting from flight cancellations and misconnections, and allowing for prompt refunds. Let me just go back. I misread 259.8. When the change occurs within 7 days of the scheduled flight date, carriers have 30 minutes to provide that notification to passengers. I'm sorry if I misspoke. And 14 CFR 399.81 discusses deceptive or unrealistic scheduling. That rule states that airlines may not engage in unrealistic scheduling, which essentially means a pattern or practice of an air carrier adding stops to purchased itineraries would likely constitute an unrealistic scheduling. Currently, the department does not have a regulation that requires compensation to passengers in the event of a delay. The department has issued some previous statements on this topic. In the preamble to the final rule enhancing airline passenger protections, colloquially known as Consumer Rule 1 from 2011, passengers' rights in the event of significant delays. Passengers would be due a refund, including a refund of non-refundable tickets and associated optional fees due to certain significant delays. We stated that the delay, an example would be the delay causes the passenger to miss an important event that is unlikely to reoccur or be rescheduled, job interview, family event that was scheduled well in advance of the date of the delayed flight. The department has not adopted a strict standard of what constitutes a significant delay. Moreover, in enforcement notices and various enforcement notices that the department has issued since 1996 to the present, the department has said it is manifestly unfair for a carrier to fail to provide the transportation contracted for, but then also refuse to provide a refund if the passenger finds that the offered rerouting to be unacceptable, which could result in a great delay or would otherwise be inconvenient to the passenger. And the statement reflects the enforcement office's and the department's interpretation since at least 1996. So at the ACPAC meeting last year, the department the department stated that it received approximately 20,000 complaints, consumer complaints in calendar years 2017 and about 15,000 complaints in 2018. So almost 35,000 complaints over 2 years. Of those 35,000 complaints, only 140 of those complaints related to the issue of involuntary changes to itineraries. We reviewed some of the common themes that we commonly saw in consumer complaints, such as the carrier's failure to provide a refund after the itinerary change or to provide expense reimbursement, failure to notify the customer of the itinerary change, that the itinerary changed included the addition of a stop even when the consumer intentionally chose a non-stop flight. The itinerary change caused or was expected to cause a missed connection. The carrier's refusal to rebook the consumer on another airline at no additional cost to the consumer, or the carrier's refusal to honor purchased optional services after the itinerary change. Most of the responses from the responses from the carriers to these complaints involve the schedule changes are common in the industry and are consistent with the airline's guidelines. The carrier provided the passenger an option to rebook or cancel for a refund of the unused portion. The consumer chose not to cancel the ticket and therefore accepted the schedule change. Or per the airline's policy, when a consumer accepts a schedule change, the carrier does not offer reimbursement for expenses and does not offer gestures of goodwill such as travel vouchers. We also reviewed information that is disclosed on airlines' websites. U.S. carriers generally disclose their policies relating to itinerary changes on its carrier's website, either on its customer service plan, in its contract of carriage, or some place it in a frequently asked questions section of its website. At the meeting in 2019, we reviewed some examples of large U.S. carrier policies on this issue, so this U.S. carrier, their policy, if a schedule change, if flight schedules are subject to change without notice and advertised published times are not guaranteed, an airline cannot guarantee that its passengers will make connections. It states that for changes outside 7 days of the scheduled departure, the airline will notify the passenger in as far advance as practicable the airline will attempt to do so within 48 hours of becoming aware of the schedule change. And the airline did state that for changes within 7 days, it will notify passengers within 30 minutes of the airline being aware of the change. The counterpart to that policy is the passengers' rights outlined in the carrier's policy. For changes outside 7 days of scheduled departure, the passenger may either accept the revised itinerary, choose an alternate flight within 14 days of the original travel, or they may cancel for a full refund. But for changes within 7 days, a passenger may request either transportation at no additional charge on the carrier's next available flight, or they can request a refund of the unused portion of that fare. So during the meeting in 2019, we heard from consumer advocates and airlines on these issues. I'm just going to briefly review the information presented to the committee by these presenters. So from the consumer advocates' view, we heard from two different consumer organizations. The first one was Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports indicated that passengers should be treated fairly and consistently, properly notified, accommodated, and compensated when involuntary changes do occur. They noted that the current system renders passengers almost powerless when itinerary changes occur, and that the root of these issues stem from the carrier's contract of carriage. Consumer Reports noted that the contract of carriages are often large documents which give all the rights to the passengers, can often be written in legalese, and are subject to be changed at any time, and are classic examples of what's called a contract of adhesion. Generally means a take it or leave it contract, in which the parties do not have the ability to negotiate the terms of the contract, which is written in the best interest of the carrier and written by the carrier. We also heard from a consumer advocate group, Flyers Rights. They noted that some of the most common problems identified by passengers in this topic include that small changes in travel schedules can result in misconnections, a change from nonstop itineraries to connecting itineraries, changes that result in long layovers, often can be 6 to 15 hours, sometimes requiring a hotel stay. Changes in travel days can result in missed vacation days. It can change the destination city, and changes can occur on such short notice or without any notice. The Flyers Rights continued and stated that the Uniform Commercial Code, which governs other consumer contract terms, generally do not apply to airlines. They noted again that contracts of adhesion under the UCC, take it or leave it contracts, are generally prohibited. Generally, the UCC states that providers of goods or services must provide refunds in the event that one party cannot fulfill the terms of the agreement. And under the Uniform Commercial Code, generally breaching parties must pay for the injured party to receive the contracted goods somewhere elsewhere. Flyers Rights noted that airlines are not required to mitigate the damages to a passenger who has been affected by a carrier's failure to provide the contracted service or flight. Again, talking about the contract of carriage, they're written often in illusory or non-binding terms. That generally means terms such as may, or can, which leaves discretion, and not binding terms such as shall or must. Flyers Rights also noted the Airline Deregulation Act generally preempts state contract law application to airlines, leaving the Department of Transportation as the sole regulator of airline contract terms. Both Consumer Reports and Flyers Rights made recommendations to the committee during their presentation. Consumer Reports recommendations were that all U.S. carriers should be required to notify passengers within 1 hour of any change to a scheduled flight. Inconvenienced passengers should be given priority in resecuring seats that were previously assigned to the passenger. Fees for seat selection should be refunded if the passenger is unable to secure the same seat on the rescheduled flight. Passengers should be fully informed of their right to a refund if the passenger does not accept the new itinerary. Airlines should also be required to pay the passenger a cancellation or change fee, or pay for a substantially similar flight on another airline. And finally, from Consumer Reports, the department should implement a passenger's bill of rights to ensure all passengers on U.S. carriers are treated fairly during air transportation. Similarly, Flyer Rights made some recommendations to the committee. They stated that the department should mandate refunds and compensation to passengers in order to cover additional expenses that result from involuntary changes to passenger itineraries. They stated the department should require airlines to pay consumers the same change fee passengers are required to pay the airline when there is a customer-driven change to itinerary. The department should establish standards for itinerary changes and incorporate those standards in the legal authority airlines are provided from the department to offer air transportation. And the department should increase notification requirements to passengers. So in addition to the view of consumer advocates, the committee heard from 3 different airlines: the large airline, the low-cost carrier, and an ultra-low-cost carrier. So United Airlines presented its view as a large U.S. carrier. It stated that airline travel is generally not comparable to other service industries due to the unique factors that make an airline's ability to complete its contract responsibilities almost impossible. They stated that less than 1% of United itineraries are ultimately subject to involuntary changes. And when those occur, it's generally due to irregular operations caused by weather or schedule changes made by the airline. United reviewed its policy for how it handles involuntary changes. Its policy is to provide a refund if requested by the passenger, to refund optional or ancillary fees purchased by the passenger, or to waive any change fee if the new itinerary is not acceptable to the passenger. United noted that complaints related to involuntary changes were less than 1% of the total number of complaints received by the carrier, 0.07% of the total number of complaints. So United reiterated that it was a very small number of the total complaints that they received. United stated that it did not believe that there is a need for an additional regulation in this area due to the minimal effect on consumers and the small percentage of complaints received by the carrier. For the low-cost carrier presentation, we heard from JetBlue Airways. JetBlue stated that it always seeks to mitigate the effect to its consumers when there are delays, cancellations, or itinerary changes. It stated that most itinerary changes are caused by irregular operations, and JetBlue always seeks to ensure it is handling affected customers in a fair manner. JetBlue stated that when changes occur, it will provide notification to passengers through multiple methods for all changes. JetBlue stated that it will then use an internal reaccommodation tool, which is designed to reaccommodate passengers using the next best itinerary, giving rules and standards that the carrier has established. JetBlue's reaccommodation tool, as they informed us, considers several factors, such as the time in seat when calculating the next best itinerary for the passenger. JetBlue will also offer a refund if the passenger does not accept the new itinerary or waive change fees. JetBlue noted that it is the only airline to implement a passenger bill of rights. It also states that passengers may be empowered to find flights on other airlines, and JetBlue will issue compensation to the passenger to cover that additional cost. But JetBlue did not make any specific recommendations to the committee during its presentation. Finally, we heard from the ultra low-cost carrier view, which was presented by Allegiant Airlines. Allegiant stated that there is already common ground between airlines, passengers, and the department related to the handling of involuntary itinerary changes. Allegiant reviewed its policy for how it handles involuntary changes. Its policy is to either permit the passenger to accept the change, rebook the passenger on another Allegiant flight without a change fee or a difference in fare, or provide a travel credit or refund if the passenger does not accept the changes. And Allegiant did not make any specific recommendations to the department or to the committee at its last meeting. After the meeting, in preparation for this public meeting, we received one comment on the public docket from a consumer. The comment from the consumer stated that the committee should recommend the adoption of a binding regulation that explicitly entitles air travel consumers to a refund in the original form of payment when the consumer's flight itinerary is affected by a cancellation or a significant schedule change, and that the committee should recommend that the department take swifter action against airlines that continued the unfair and deceptive practices of denying refunds to passengers in such situations. And that is the summary of the information presented to the committee at the last meeting.
Thank you. Whoops. Thank you, Stuart, for that presentation. So similar to the transparency of airline ancillary fees, there are a lot of different thoughts from the presenters at the April 2019 meeting. Anything ranging from no action is needed since the department receives very few complaints and the airlines receive very few complaints, to suggestions that airlines be required to cover the additional expenses that passengers may incur from involuntary itinerary changes, to passengers potentially being informed of their right to a refund by the airline if a passenger does not accept the new itinerary, and a range of others, Bill of Rights and so forth. So let me open it up to the committee members to see if anyone has some preliminary thoughts.
Well, I remember from our last meeting, the meeting that we were together, there were a minimal amount of complaints. And it seems like the risk of over-regulating the industry and the unintended consequences of regulation for that tiny sort of percentage of complaints is far outweighs any sort of like benefit. And it seems like the airlines are doing the right thing. They're rebooking their passengers correctly. And it's all due to irregular operations, which nobody could actually predict. So I'm fine with the way it is right now.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Anyone else with thoughts to share?
I think one of the things it may be good to point out also is, since this, these complaints have been, and again, just the sheer numbers, 140 complaints out of 35,000 that you received. But having said that, there were some discussions on the presentation that Stuart just highlighted about sort of creating equities in the fact that, airlines charge, cancellation fees, why can't they reimburse the passenger when there's a cancellation? You all, I'm sure, are aware of the fact that most U.S. airlines have actually eliminated cancellation fees now. Change fees, I'm sorry, not cancellation fees, change fees, I meant to say. So this shows you how kind of the market works and competitive nature of these airlines is that these things are implemented. So that has gone away. I also want to say, if I understand correctly, again, when you look at the statutory language, I know that it provided that the secretary may consult with air carriers and the advisory committee. So thank you. I think, obviously, Blaine, it's phenomenal that you all have come to this group, so we can talk through these things. But if I understand this, the only requirement you have is just to provide Congress with the report of the review of the practices, right? I mean, it's not about any other further recommendation other than the findings from this?
Yes, that is correct. With regard to this, it's Section 414 of the FAA Act. DOT is supposed to be providing a report on its review and also on its consultation. So Congress is not mandating any particular action aside from the review taking place.
Okay.
And I want to also correct myself on transparency of airline ancillary fees. Patricia, you had stated that DOT is not required to notify Congress, and I checked while Stuart was talking because I thought the language of Appropriations Act may have said something different, and it does. DOT is directed to provide a report to the House and Senate committees on appropriations on the progress that it's making regarding the guidelines. So DOT will need to provide a report for both the transparency of airline ancillary fees, and we will also need to provide a report for involuntary changes to passenger itineraries.
Great.
Okay.
I was going to go exactly where Patricia went, which goes back to the mandate, which is the review. And through that review, saw that at least 5 items that the airlines are doing in order to handle involuntary changes, providing refunds if requested by the passenger, refund optional or ancillary fees, waive any change fees if the new itinerary. And I was going to note the same thing that Patricia mentioned. It seems like most change fees are gone now anyway as a result of the marketplace being irregular and as it relates to COVID, and then notification of changes to passengers through multiple methods, and reaccommodate passengers on another flight by the carrier, including waiving fees for differences in fares. So it seems like the department has met that mandate through the review. So I think as long as we have met that, that appears to me to be the mandate that we have and what we should fulfill.
Okay. I think it is correct that the review, the department had done a preliminary review even prior to the ACPAC meeting, and then through the ACPAC, I think it's correct to note that the review has been done. And the question for the ACPAC is, as a result of this review that has been conducted by the department and all of the presenters that we have heard from, is there action, if any, that is needed? And I think Mario's point was that considering the low number of complaints, the 140 or so complaints the department had received in this area out of 20,000, and the low complaints that airlines had reported on, that maybe no further action is needed. And as I understood it, Patricia, your point was that some of the actions that are being requested, such as the change fee being waived, is actually occurring even on a much larger scale, and that airlines are removing their change fees so that they don't have them anymore. So is there any?
Yeah, I think it's that. I think there, it was the point about notification within half an hour. That's already required. So some of these things sort of resolve themselves, I believe. And obviously, there is always the way I think we looked at these issues is making sure that the airlines are communicating what the policies are to passengers, so that you have the authority as DOT, under unfair and deceptive practices, to then determine whether that has been violated. But I think some of these other things, recommendations or comments by some of the presenters, I think they're already dealt with either by practice or by law, frankly, unless I'm missing something.
Well, let me ask you about one of the recommendations from, I think it may have been from Consumer Advocate, that passengers should be informed of their right to a refund. Airlines certainly do provide refunds to passengers that don't accept the rerouting. There is no DOT requirement that airlines proactively notify passengers of the right to a refund.
It's a negotiated type of thing, isn't it? If I say, can't you offer me something else? I don't want that, usually it is negotiated.
I guess the DOT has expressly not opined on that before,
Yeah.
because the reality is that, again, the policies are clear on what what that refund is. So I don't know that there's any requirement to notify the passenger of rights that the passenger knows he or she already has based on the contracts of carriage or the website or the frequently asked question segments that are in the carrier website. So I think, again, as long as the passenger requests the refund, if the passenger is entitled to the refund, they would receive it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that, again, it seems to me like that's outside the scope of what we're being asked to do here, to make a recommendation. It's a recommendation by one of the consumer groups, but I don't think we're in a position as a committee to make a recommendation at this moment on anything like this, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, so just to make it clear, the department's position is that if the passenger is entitled to a refund, if there is a canceled flight, or if there is a significant delay. But Patricia, you're correct in that if a passenger requests a refund, in those cases, the airline is supposed to be providing the refund. There is no obligation to say to the passenger, you are entitled to a refund. And I'm hearing from at least Patricia, you, and possibly Fran from you as well, that may not be necessary. And that, Patricia, that your view that may be potentially even outside the scope.
Yes, I also think that the obligation is on the airlines to make sure that that policy is clear. And I think as long as the policy is stated of when you can request a refund or not, again, to me, it's repetitive. Why would you tell a consumer what they should know already by the way that the policy is written? So it's sort of a double. I just don't see the need for that for once. And I also, again, think it's outside the scope of this inquiry. But again, I would like to hear from, I don't know, AG Carr or Mario, what you might think about this.
Yeah, my opinion is I want to do exactly what we're mandated to do, which is review, candidly. And then there are other avenues to change the law, to change policy, to change DOT rule. From my perspective, I want to make sure we do what we are mandated to do, which is review. I think then that becomes, if DOT wants to change its position down the road, I think it's up to DOT. If Congress wants to do it, but I think, Patricia, to your point, again, oftentimes in the marketplace takes care of that. The most important thing is if a consumer is entitled to the refund, the consumer needs to get the refund. Whether or not it's told or not, the issue is getting the refund to me. And if that's what the law requires, the consumer needs to get the refund.
Yeah. And I will just mention as an aside, the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act does include a provision in it concerning Bill of Rights. And that's something the department is also looking at in terms of implementing. There is a requirement for the department to require airlines to submit a one-page document that describes the rights of passengers in air transportation. It's in section 429 of the FAA Reauth. So this is essentially supporting, I think, the point, AG Carr, you are making that, aside from the work of this ACPAC, there are other areas that the department has responsibility in that it would be looking further into.
Yeah, my preference is do no more, no less than what the committee is tasked with doing.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So is it fair to say that with regard to the review of passengers, involuntary changes to passenger itineraries, that the ACPAC has done the review? They have heard from the various stakeholders, and the ACPAC has concluded at this time that they do not have a specific recommendation on this point. But note that, as Mario has said, that there are a few complaints in this area. Is that an accurate description of where you've landed? Is there something that any of the members want to add?
Blaine, would that mean that you would include in that statement the different items that the airlines provided? I think that's important. The airlines have
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. No. And maybe I should repeat that too for context. Yeah. I think we would need to, even before the report goes into why before the report states there's no specific recommendation on this, it would need to provide context that airlines have waived, at least the large airlines recently have waived change fees, that a lot of the notification requirements that are being suggested are already required of the airlines by DOT, that airlines are required to provide refunds if there are significant delays or cancellations. So I think that's a good point. We don't want it to appear as if the ACPAC is saying just no recommendation, but noting what has been done in this area.
Yeah, that we reviewed it.
That seems right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, I think that is the last of the issues. I think we've recapped at each of the sessions, so I will open it up for questions from the attendees, unless the ACPAC members have anything additional that they would like to add. Okay, Kim, if you can, I do see raised hand, but because there are folks who have been writing on the chat, I will, if you have a question, please go ahead and comment through the chat feature. And Kim Graver, deputy in my office, will go ahead and read the questions. Kim?
Okay, great. So we do have a few comments and questions. Starting at the beginning of the afternoon session, one individual asked if there would be a discussion of comments submitted by the public in the docket related to this meeting. We did have one comment submitted by this individual on the 21st. So I can read that comment, or we can go ahead and jump ahead to these other comments and go back to that one.
Kim, why don't you go ahead and read the comments, because we made it a point of periodically checking the docket and ensuring that the ACPAC members received the comments that were placed. So if there's something that we've missed, I want to make sure that we discuss it.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not suggesting we missed this. This was a comment that came in on 21st regarding it states that it's a comment for the September 24th, 2020 meeting of the ACPAC. And the comment is regarding the COVID-19 pandemic brought a number of complaints regarding significant changes, schedule changes, and cancellations of flights.
Oh, okay. So if there are comments that are being made related to the COVID-19 public health emergency, I recognize that some of the participants are joining at different points. So I will repeat what I said this morning, which is that the purpose of today's meeting is to discuss 3 topics: in-flight sexual misconduct, transparency of airline ancillary fees, and involuntary changes to passenger itineraries. We certainly recognize, I think all of the ACPAC members as well as DOT recognizes that the COVID-19 public health emergency has impacted everyone's life, including impacting air travel. And to the extent that there are consumer matters related to air travel and COVID-19 that any of the participants would like to discuss, what I would suggest is that you contact the ACPAC member that represents your interests. So if you're an airline, contact Patricia. If you are a consumer or consumer group, please contact Fran, so that when we are trying to determine topics for the next ACPAC meeting, your thoughts can be fully considered. But we will not be discussing COVID-related matters at this meeting unless they relate specifically to these 3 topics.
Okay, great. Thank you. So then jumping down, if I go in chronological order, then we're going to go back to the topic of ancillary service fees. So starting with that topic, Charlie Leoka from Travelers United commented, "The market failure is basic. Customers need to know exactly how much a trip will cost prior to purchase. We cannot I think it means not know. Drip pricing is discouraged by the FTC. For other industries, DOT allows drip pricing, and transparency needs the same language. If the airlines speak in English and the consumers only understand French, is that transparency? Now at another level, speaking in another language, everything is more complex and impossible to understand for consumers. Consumers need competition, not confusion. Hiding resort fees," and then it ends with a question, "Hiding resort fees is creating a better widget, question mark."
Yes, so I don't know, Kim, whether that is more of a comment than a question. Certainly, I can say for the department that we want transparency in airline fees. I don't think anyone would be in favor of hidden fees. I don't think as a business, it's going to be helpful for airlines or ticket agents to hide the fees. I do recognize, I think, the point that Charlie's making, that it does at times take work on the consumer's part to determine the fee that would apply for their particular travel. And I think that's a similar point that John in his presentation may have made with the example of the skis.
Hey, Blaine, I want to comment. since there was a reference to my statement, in absolutely no way, shape, or form was I suggesting that, and I may have been inarticulate. My point was, we AGs have seen the issue and the challenges of multiple players, multiple platforms, different fees going into what's called a resort fee. Each property might put one item in a resort fee, some might put 10. The point being, there is a challenge with that when you have multiple players. So we've seen you don't want to pick and choose winners through government action. My point was, we've seen this in other spaces as well. I was in no way suggesting that hiding a resort fee was building a better widget. So I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that.
Okay. Thank you, AG Carr. Kim?
Okay, and then we have another comment and then a question. So a comment from Imad and NSR. Frequent changes made by airlines to their websites make finding information about ancillary fees, such as checking in a surfboard, hard on their airline's own websites. Sometimes an airline displays contradictory information about the same fee on different pages of the same website. I believe what's essential is to help the consumer be informed about all the fees in order to avoid surprises about ancillary fees, such as checking in a bag once a ticket has been purchased. And that's the comment. And then I have one more question on this topic from somebody else. Does anyone want to comment on the comment?
So I guess really the comment in terms of airlines having different fees for the same item, I do think if a consumer were to see that, they should inform the airline so that it can be corrected. It certainly is possible that there could be mistakes made on one page updated and another page not updated. And if that does not work, or if a consumer thinks this is a practice, consumers can also contact the department to let us know if they think there is inaccurate information, and to the extent it's conflicting, it would be inaccurate information. I don't know how common this is. This is not something that we typically hear from consumers at the department about. I don't know, Patricia, if there's anything you want to add on that.
No, I was going to, just echo what you're saying. Absolutely contact the airline, because it could be a mistake of some sort, and updating when things are changing. It's the best course of action, or even contact, DOT, as you said, if it's a repeated practice.
Okay, and then moving on to a question. This is a question from Bill McGee for Fran Smith. Bill is from Consumer Reports, and he asks, do you believe that consumers should receive full and complete fare, fee, and tax information prior to purchase, regardless of booking channel, online or offline, directly through the airline or through a third party?
Could you repeat that, please? Because it sounds like
Sure. Do you believe that consumers should receive full and complete fare, fee, and tax information prior to purchase? And then it asks, regardless of booking channel, online or offline, from the airline or through a third party?
Well, I do believe consumers should receive that full information. If they go to an airline website, they should be able to access that. If they go to an agent, they should be able to get that information as well. So I don't know what the question is getting at. Of course, I think all of us would agree that consumers should be able to get that information, so whether it's offline or not. So
I think the distinction, though, is just to make sure. Sorry.
Go ahead. We were probably going to say the same thing. No. So go ahead.
No, I think the way that I understood the question, it was the very tail end of the question was on any ticket purchased through any means. I think, again,
okay.
This requirement is to be provided by the airline or by any party that is under contract with the airline to sell that ticket for a fee. So whether that information is provided by some, mega tax search somewhere else, that is not under contract with the airline and receives information just from the public website, that may not be the case. Is that where you were going with this, Blaine?
Yeah, I guess 2 points I want to make here. One is the department does require airlines and ticket agents to provide the total mandatory fees. So the example that the individual provided was the fare, the fee, and the tax.
Taxes.
So the fare and the tax and any mandatory fee is required to be included in the ticket price and fully disclosed at the initial search today.
Yes.
Now, the commenter asked about fee and did not elaborate on whether he was referencing mandatory fee or ancillary fee. Ancillary fees are not currently required to be included in the total price that is displayed. So if you go to a ticket agent's website and you are purchasing a ticket from here to Chicago, from DC to Chicago, and that ticket would have to include the tax and the fare. But if you wanted to purchase the bag or several bags, there is no requirement that that bag fee be included in the total. However, there is a DOT requirement that the airline or ticket agent indicate that baggage fees may apply. And you will see on there that baggage fees may apply, and the passenger would need to click on that hyperlink, and then they would be able to see what that baggage fee is. They would need to read through it and to figure out exactly what applies to them, but DOT does require that there be specific enough information for the baggage fee that the consumer can determine what that fee is. But that fee is, there is no requirement that that fee be included as part of the price if it is an ancillary.
Yes, just to clarify that, in the initial search, you wouldn't know what you're going to end up getting until you know that you want to purchase, let's say, an upgraded seat, or you want to have 2 bags instead of 1. So that would not be able to happen in the initial search, but it would certainly happen before you pay for the ticket. You would know.
You would know. You would know for the bag. The other types of ancillary services, whether it's in-flight entertainment or food or anything else, that information the ticket agents currently do not display, and that is not required of ticket agents today. The airlines are required to display on their website information about the fees for all of their ancillary services. DOT does allow the airlines to display that information in a range. It does not have to be specific, because oftentimes it's dynamic information like seats, where the price you pay this morning and even an hour later may not be the same. And
Or those services are provided by a third party, such as insurance, for example.
Kim, any other questions?
Okay, sure. So that was a great segue into the next. There were 2 more comments on the transparency issue, which I missed. I apologize. So I'll just read those comments, and they are regarding what you just discussed. So Charlie Leoka from Travelers United commented that knowing the full price is basic. It's the only way that the market works for cars, for insurance, or refrigerators. And one of the major functions of the FTC is truth in advertising. DOT needs full price truth in advertising. Now DOT allows partial truth, and that does not serve consumers. And then Imad and Asur commented that airlines making you mentioned seat selections fees. Airlines making seat selection fees depend on dynamic factors such as demand and load factors that can change with time, makes it hard for consumers to figure out how much they will pay. And then we've got some new questions coming in, I think, based on the previous comments.
Kim, I'm not sure there's much more to say on the 2 comments that have been made. I recognize Charlie's position in terms of full cost being available. It was one of the areas that he gave remarks back in April, and Rob did recap his views on that, and that was one of the things that was considered by the ACPAC. Certainly is an area that the department is looking at. All of you know that there is this joint statement directing the department to look to see and ensure that there is transparency in airline pricing and consulting with the stakeholders, which we are doing through this mechanism. The department has determined that it will hold off on making any sort of determinations on what action, if any, it will take in this area until it has finished the consultation process. So the ACPAC process has been very helpful, and we will have to see once this meeting ends today and we get a written recommendations from the ACPAC, the department will carefully study this matter and determine its next steps.
Okay. Do you want to move on to the next topic? I think Bill, I have one more follow-up from Bill McGee on his question.
Sure, this can be the last question on transparency, and then we'll move on to involuntary changes.
Okay, and so I think you might have just addressed what Bill had asked, but his statement was all fees. He is discussing including all fees in fair information, and says respectfully, the question is to Fran to determine her view on transparency issues. If Blaine and Patricia answer on behalf of Fran, it defeats the purpose of asking Fran the question. And Fran, also, there was another commenter who wanted to get your contact information.
Kim, I'm going to just, I'm a little surprised at that comment. I think really we are all trying to work together with a common goal. And I think we all have to assume the best of one another. And certainly I'm not trying to speak for Fran, and I will, Fran is fully capable of speaking for herself. But I do want to say that, all of us are working for the same goal. And I think if we keep the goal in mind, and whether the answers on transparency may be coming from me or Patricia, because we have worked in this industry for quite a while, I think hopefully what should count is that the information being provided is accurate. But Fran, I do not intend to speak for you, but I also don't think it's fair to put you in that position. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I'm sorry, who is the questioner on this? Because I think he knows.
Oh, this is Bill, right. This is Bill McGee from Consumer Reports. Yes, I know you know Bill.
And Patricia corrected me on my misinterpretation of the question. So that's why she responded, which I appreciated. I had left out the ending of the question. And Blaine came in because she is much more familiar with the statutory requirements. And I appreciated that because as you probably are aware, the statutory language that DOT has to deal with is enormous. So I have not had a chance yet to review every statute and impress it upon my mind. So I appreciated Blaine's comments, and I appreciated Patricia's for clarifying my misinterpretation. In terms of transparency, my view is consumers do need transparency to be able to shop for the best value and whatever they want to make their own decision. And in displaying, I think we talked throughout that there is so many variables now in the pricing, in so many variables in not only where you shop, but what you're shopping for, that it is very difficult to get the information. But I think that's true with everywhere you shop. I shop online for medical supplies, and I have to evaluate how much does it cost for this carton per item versus another carton that has different numbers and it doesn't have an item price. So I end up dividing, multiplying enormously to buy a box of medical materials. So I can't say the manufacturers are letting me down by not having a standardized way of doing it. That's not the issue I'm addressing. So I think in consumers' view of wanting an easy way to make a decision, I think with the complexity of the world today, it's not going to be increasingly easy. It's going to be more complicated. So I think what we have now is the seat prices, and as we know, those prices can change depending on the amount on the demand. The upgrades that can change depending again on what the demand is, what's available. So the display at times of the initial search has certain requirements, but those may not be what are important to an individual consumer. So I would say consumers just have to dig and search and figure and do those comparisons, do their own checkouts, add what they want, and then see what the final price is with all the add-ons they might want that aren't necessarily necessary to be disclosed.
Okay. Kim, why don't we go ahead and see what questions there are on involuntary changes to passenger itineraries?
No, we've gotten questions by both chat and email. So, so don't worry, folks, I am aware of that. And so let me start with Andrew Applebaum from Flyers Rights asks, since last April, what steps, if any, have the committee members taken to address the concerns raised by consumer groups that DOT complaint numbers do not accurately reflect how often issues, including this one, are occurring? Certainly 140 complaints do not capture what is happening, and this is with the involuntary changes to itineraries.
So I'm sorry, Kim, who was that question from?
Sorry, Andrew Applebaum from Flyers Rights.
Sure. Andrew, I'm not sure if I'm understanding your question correctly, but if what you're asking is, have we continued to look at DOT complaints in this area to see if we are receiving a larger portion of complaints? I can tell you that we are not receiving a larger portion of complaints related to this issue. I know we had said we are not going to be talking about the COVID-19 matter, but to answer your question, the vast majority of the complaints we receive now, which is public because it's published in the Air Travel Consumer Report, really deals with refunds for flights that are canceled or significantly delayed, as opposed to because there were involuntary changes of an additional stop, or, you know, the way the statute has it, plus or minus 3 hours. So we don't receive that type of complaint as much. We continue to have a low level of complaints in this particular area.
Okay, and if none of the members have any further comments, I'll go ahead to the next question. From Bill McGee again, please clarify the record in response to repeated comments that change fees have not been addressed and are gone now. At the recent permanent elimination of change fees, permanent in quotes, by UADL and AA include significant caveats. They do not include basic economy fares, and they do not include international fares, where change fees can range as high as $750. And in some cases, the difference in lower fares is no longer credited to consumers. The DOT should not accept these statements as factual.
Thank you for that comment. Patricia, since you had talked about change fees, I certainly have seen some of the reports which is being referenced as well in terms of United, Delta, America eliminating change fees in certain circumstances. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. my point to that was that it was to highlight the way that market forces will work with this and competitive nature of this industry, that, you know, people have choices. And when it comes to the ultra low cost fare, you always have about 3 reminders before you make that purchase that says this is non-refundable, you understand. Even if you cancel, it's not refundable, you understand. You can't change this. Literally, it's about 3 or 4 times that you have to go through before you acknowledge that. So the issue of, so yes, there are caveats, but it has been a widespread practice across all airlines pretty much in the US. I can't speak for international fees. We're just talking about domestic right now. And that's what some of these issues really, I thought, were designed to address with this committee, as the domestic flights that we've been talking about in the 7, you know, the itinerary changes. So all I was trying to say was not that this solves every issue, but that it certainly shows the way that people can make choices and buy tickets on airlines based on their policies. And as long as those policies are accurately described and people acknowledge those through the purchasing process, then that takes care of some of these concerns that I think have been addressed. But, you know, again, if I missed something, you know, we can certainly address it. But I just thought it was illustrative of how the market works.
Thank you, Patricia. And Kim, I do want to make actually a clarification to my response to Andrew from Flyer Rights about involuntary changes. Because the way that Congress has written the statute on involuntary changes, it applies to travel that is more than 24 hours before departure, and it also talks about either additional stops or plus or minus 3 hours. It's possible some of these may be classified as significantly delayed flights. And I say possible because, as Stuart mentioned in his remarks, significant delayed flights, there isn't one standard for it, but airlines have different ways of determining what is significant delayed. So for complaints starting, let's say, from March of 2020 to now, we are still going over those data. So I would not be able to answer your question as to how many of those complaints relate to significant delays, which may also implicate involuntary changes. Hopefully that clarifies and doesn't confuse folks.
Okay. And then I have another question here. Sorry, we got a question by email that came in a few different parts, so I'm going to do my best to put it together in one question. This is from Paul Hudson at Flyers Rights. Aside from confusion about ancillary fees, oh, I'm sorry, we're going back to ancillary service fees. Some airlines.
Kim, can we finish? Let's go ahead and finish the involuntary changes, and then we will see if we can take just that one question on transparency if we receive it. I just want us to talk in sections.
Right, exactly. Yes. And so we have actually, and I apologize, this email came in with multiple questions, so my mistake. There is a question about involuntary schedule changes. It says Allegiant indicated, this is still from Paul Hudson, Allegiant indicated that it had involuntary schedule changes for over 10% of its flights. And since 2019, there has been a huge increase in voluntary schedule changes and consumer complaints, with Flyers Rights receiving over 400 complaints since March. Why have we not updated the info since April? I think you just answered that question, actually. I apologize.
And also keep in mind, Paul, when you're looking at involuntary changes, that we're looking at it in the way it's defined in the statute, meaning 24 hours before departure, and also whether there was an additional stop. And then further, we are really looking at itinerary changes that have plus or minus 3 hours. So if it's an itinerary change with less than 3 hours and no stop, we're not including it in that data.
Okay, and I know I know, Fran, you weren't trying to dodge the question. I just wanted to mention that there was a request for Fran's contact information. I don't know if we want to.
Yes, we can, go ahead, Fran.
I can do it now if people would like. I had given out my email contact information last year when I joined the committee to some people who requested it. It's smithfran, one word, @gmail.com. And please put subject DOT or something like that so I will know to what it relates. That's smithfran@gmail.com.
Great, thank you, Fran. I think we have one more comment on the involuntary comment and question on the involuntary itinerary changes. This is from Imad and Nasser again. Complaints from consumers related to refusal of some airlines to issue cash refunds following involuntary changes have exploded since March, and especially with regards to foreign airlines operating to and from the US. And the question is, did the committee or the DOT try to address the situation?
So I know I've said we're not going to address COVID related, but since you are linking it to passenger itineraries, I will just comment very briefly to say that the department has received a very high volume of complaints. We received like 5,100 or so in March, almost 23,000 in April or May. And so we're receiving a really high volume. Most of them do deal with refunds. Some of them deal with canceled flights. Some deal with significant delay. So if your question is, are we looking into this? Yes, we are very actively looking into it. And I would say more than looking into it. This is really a main, one of the main areas that not only my time, but a lot of my staff time is spent is trying to address these issues.
Great. So I think that's all of the comments and questions we received. And the docket, of course, will be open if additional comments or questions come in
Can we
later.
go back to, I think it was Paul Hudson had one question on ancillary fees, and that will be the last question.
Sure. Hold on one second. Sorry, I'm trying to find the right email that summarizes all of his questions. Okay, here we go. Paul Hudson, aside from confusion and ancillary fees, some airlines now charge gotcha punitive fees now based on costs that would be considered excessive and prohibited by most state price gouging laws. Examples include Delta and American checked bag fees, which increase first, second, third bag fees for bags over 50 pounds or extra or oversized. Spirit also has 70 optional fees in addition to airfare that are nearly impossible to avoid, as do Frontier and Allegiant. At what point, if any, does the ACPAC feel that excessive fees or price gouging should be regulated?
So Kim, I almost wish I didn't take this question. I'll be very frank with you. And the reason I say this is because I think if there are specific concerns about any particular airline, certainly consumers can feel free to contact the department. And Paul has reached out to us in the past, as have some of the other consumer groups. I can tell you, I'm not familiar with any of the specifics in the matter that Paul has mentioned here. I will say that we don't regulate the price that airlines charge for things, but certainly we expect that the price is transparent, and that if there is I think the word that Paul used is gotcha, and I'm not sure exactly what he means by airlines have, kind of a got you on the price. But if there are specific airlines that may be of concern or specific areas that may be of concern, you can certainly reach out to DOT. You have my contact information. But again, we don't regulate the price that airlines charge for ancillary services or for their fare. That is addressed by competition. But we do expect that there will be transparent and that there would not be any hidden fees. I don't know if any of the ACPAC members want to add anything. Okay. I think this concludes this meeting of the Aviation Consumer Protection Advisory Committee. I really want to thank all 4 members for all of your work and your time and your dedication, and not only at the meeting today, but it was very apparent from your participation and deliberation process that you did put a lot of time in reviewing the minutes and the various documents and presentations that have been submitted. I particularly want to thank our chair, A.G. Carr, Attorney General from Georgia, who really came midstream to this ACPAC, but has done a really great job of engaging on the topics and brought his expertise and experience to the ACPAC. So thank you all very much. I would be remiss if I also did not thank my staff for all of the work that they've done in putting this together, and all of the participants. The questions that you are asking help us think about issues further and know what to address. So thank you all, and I look forward to receiving the written recommendations. Thank you.
And Blaine, let me just say on behalf of the commissioners, too, thank you very much for your help and that of the staff. Fantastic, great professionals. We greatly appreciate it. And I also thank the other committee members as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.